The galaxy was full of strange worlds, powerful empires, and advanced technology. Thousands of alien species lived among the stars. Some were strong, some were intelligent, and some were feared across many planets. But in one quiet place, far away from the busy trade routes, there was a building that few people liked to visit. It was called the Galactic Adoption Center. Inside this large station, many alien children waited for families. Some had lost their parents in wars. Some had been abandoned on distant planets. Others were rescued by patrol ships and brought here for safety. Most of the children were eventually adopted, but not all of them. In the far corner of the station's waiting hall, a small alien girl sat alone. Her name was Lyra. She looked very different from the other children. Her skin had a soft silver color that shimmered slightly under the lights. Her eyes were large and deep blue, almost glowing like tiny stars. Her thin arms wrapped around her knees as she quietly watched the other families walking through the hall. Every time a group entered the room, Lyra lifted her head with a small hope in her eyes. Maybe this time someone would choose her. But every time, the same thing happened. The families would look at the other children first. Some would whisper. When they noticed Lyra, others would quickly turn away. A tall reptilian couple once walked toward her. For a moment, Lyra's heart began to beat faster. But the moment they looked closely at her silver skin, they stopped. Unknown species. The male reptilian muttered. Too risky, the female replied, and they walked away. Lyra slowly looked down again. This had been happening for many weeks. Behind a nearby desk stood caretaker Solon, an old alien woman whose job was to watch over the children. Her species had lived for hundreds of years, and she had worked in the adoption center for most of her life. She had seen many sad stories, but the small silver girl worried her the most. Solon quietly walked over and sat beside Lyra. You should rest, she said gently. You have been sitting here all day again. Lyra looked up at her with tired eyes. Did someone come to see me? She asked softly. The caretaker paused. She hated answering that question. No, little one, Solon said carefully. Lyra nodded slowly, as if she already knew the answer. The truth was simple, but painful. No one wanted to adopt a child whose species was unknown. Doctors did not fully understand Lyra's biology. Her records showed that she had been found alone, in a broken escape pod, drifting near an empty star system. No one knew where she came from. No one knew if she was dangerous. And worst of all, the doctors believed she might not live very long. Solon gently placed a blanket over the girl's shoulders. You should go to your room and sleep, she said, but Lyra did not move. Instead, she stared quietly at the large entrance door of the hall. After a moment, she spoke again. Can I ask you something? Of course, Solon replied. Lyra hesitated for a moment, as if the question was very important. Before I die, can I have a father? The words were so soft that Solon almost did not hear them. The old caretaker felt a deep pain in her chest. In all her years working at the center, she had heard many wishes from lonely children. Some wanted toys, some wanted to travel, some wanted to see their home planets again. But this small girl asked for only one thing, a father. Solon slowly took Lyra's small hand. I wish it were that simple, she said gently. Adoption. Rules are very strict. Families must agree, and your species. She stopped herself before finishing the sentence. Lyra already understood. No one wants me, the girl said quietly. Solon tried to smile, but it was difficult. Sometimes, the right person just hasn't arrived yet. Lyra gave a weak nod, though hope was fading from her eyes. Just then, something unusual happened. The large doors of the adoption hall suddenly opened. Several tall figures walked inside, wearing dark diplomatic uniforms. They were not like the other aliens in the station. They looked different. Their posture was relaxed. Their movements were calm but confident, and their faces were unmistakably human. Humans were still very new to the Galactic Alliance. Many alien species did not fully understand them yet. Some considered them unpredictable. Others believed humans were too emotional to be trusted in serious matters. The group was clearly visiting the station as part of an official tour. Most of them continued walking through the hall, speaking quietly with the station director. But one of them suddenly slowed down. A man with short dark hair noticed something in the corner of the room. A small silver girl sitting alone. Their eyes met. For a brief moment, the busy hall seemed to grow quiet. The human looked at the girl, and the girl looked back at him. Neither of them knew it yet, but in just a few minutes, the entire galaxy would witness a decision that no one expected. A decision that would change Lyra's life forever. The adoption hall slowly returned to its normal quiet noise after the diplomatic group entered. Officials from the station walked beside the visitors, explaining how the Galactic Adoption Center worked. Most of the visitors nodded politely and continued walking. But one human stopped. His name was Daniel Carter. Daniel had joined the human diplomatic team only a few months ago. His job was simple: observe how other civilizations lived and report back to Earth. Humans were still very new members of the Galactic Alliance, and many alien governments were curious about them. But Daniel was not paying attention to the official tour anymore. His eyes were fixed on the small silver girl sitting alone in the corner. She looked different from every other child in the room, not just because of her silver skin or glowing blue eyes, but because she was completely alone. Other children were playing with small toys or talking to caretakers. Some were meeting possible families. The room had small groups of hope everywhere. Except for that one corner. Daniel slowly stepped away from his group. One of the alien officials noticed and spoke quickly. "Human Carter, the tour continues this way." Daniel gave a small, polite smile. "I'll catch up in a moment." Before anyone could stop him, he began walking toward the corner. Caretaker Solon noticed him approaching. Her long experience made her curious. Visitors rarely walked toward Lyra. Most preferred not to ask questions about the lonely silver child. Daniel stopped a few steps away from the girl. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Lyra looked up at him carefully. She had never seen a human before. His skin tone was warm, his face soft compared to many alien species. And his eyes showed something she did not often see in the adoption hall: kindness. Daniel slowly crouched down so he was closer to her height. "Hello," he said gently. His voice was calm and friendly. Lyra blinked in surprise. Most visitors never greeted her. "Hello," she replied quietly. Daniel gave a small smile. "What's your name?" The girl hesitated for a moment before answering. "Lyra, that's a beautiful name," Daniel said. The compliment made her look slightly confused, as if she wasn't used to hearing kind words. Daniel sat down on a nearby bench. "Are you waiting for someone?" he asked. Lyra looked toward the big doors of the hall again. "I was." The simple answer made Daniel pause. Caretaker Solon slowly walked closer, watching the situation carefully. "Human Carter," she said politely. "This child is currently under medical observation." Daniel looked up. "Medical observation." Solon nodded. "The doctors are still studying her species. She was found alone in an escape pod 3 months ago. We have no records of her people." Daniel looked back at Lyra. "So she's alone?" "Yes," Solon answered quietly. Daniel studied the girl for a moment. Despite her small size, her eyes held something deep. There was sadness there, but also patience, as if she had been waiting a long time for something. "What were you waiting for?" Daniel asked gently. Lyra thought carefully before answering. "A father." The words were so simple that they hit Daniel harder than he expected. "A father?" he repeated softly. She nodded. "Before I die." Daniel's heart skipped for a moment. Sully stepped forward quickly. "The doctors believe her condition is unstable," the caretaker explained. "Her biology is very unusual. We cannot guarantee her survival." Daniel frowned slightly. "But she's just a child." "Yes," Solon said sadly. "And because of the uncertainty, no species has been willing to adopt her." Daniel looked around the hall. Many aliens were watching now. Some whispered quietly. Humans were already considered strange by the galaxy. Their emotional behavior often confused other species. And now one of them was sitting beside the most undesirable child in the entire adoption center. Lyra looked at Daniel again. "You're human, right?" He smiled. "Yeah, first time seeing one." She nodded slowly. "You're the first one who talked to me." Daniel felt something heavy in his chest. Across the hall, the station director hurried toward them with 2 security officers. "Human Carter," the director said firmly, "I must ask you not to interfere with the adoption candidates." Daniel raised an eyebrow. "I'm just talking. The child's case is complicated." The director continued. "It is not suitable for visitors." Daniel looked down at Lyra again. She had already lowered her eyes, as if she expected this moment to happen, as if it always did. Daniel slowly stood up. For a second, Solon thought he would simply leave, like everyone else. But instead, he asked a question that made the entire room fall silent. "Where are the adoption forms?" The director blinked in shock. "I'm sorry. What?" Daniel spoke calmly. "If no one else wants her, I do." The room exploded with whispers. Aliens stared at the human in disbelief. Caretaker. Solon's eyes widened, and Lyra slowly lifted her head again, unsure if she had heard correctly, because for the first time since arriving at the adoption center, someone was actually asking to choose her. The quiet adoption hall suddenly filled with whispers. Aliens from many different species turned to look at the human standing near the silver girl. Some looked confused, others looked shocked. A few, even, looked worried. The station director stared at Daniel Carter as if he had just heard something impossible. "I believe there is a misunderstanding," the director said slowly. "You cannot adopt this child." Daniel stayed calm. "Why not?" he asked. The director gestured toward the girl. "Her case is classified as unknown risk. We do not know her species, do not understand her biology. And according to our doctors, her condition is unstable." Daniel glanced at Lyra again. She was looking down at the floor, her small hands gripping the edge of the bench. He could see something in her. Expression, fear, not fear of being sick, but fear of hope. Daniel crossed his arms. "So, because she's different, she just sits here alone." "That is not what I said," the director replied quickly. "We are protecting the safety of potential families from a child," Daniel asked. The director did not answer immediately. By now, several members of the diplomatic tour had gathered nearby. Some alien officials whispered to each other while watching the situation carefully. Caretaker, Solon stepped forward. "Human Carter," she said gently. "Perhaps it would be best to discuss this privately." But Daniel did not move. Instead, he asked another question. "What does she want?" The director frowned. "The child's wishes are not the main concern here." Daniel shook his head. "Seems like they should be." The room grew quieter. Finally, the director sighed. "This matter must be reviewed by the Adoption Council," he said. "No adoption can happen without their approval." Daniel nodded once. Then let's talk to them. Short time later. The council chamber inside the station was filled with officials. Large screens displayed medical reports about Lyra. Doctors explained everything they knew, everything they didn't know. Her DNA did not match any known species. Her internal biology was extremely unusual. Some readings suggested her body produced unknown forms of energy, and worst of all, her health seemed fragile. At the center of the chamber, Daniel sat quietly while the council members discussed the situation. A tall, insect-like council member spoke. First, allowing this human to adopt the child would be irresponsible. We know nothing about her kind. Another alien with blue crystal skin nodded. She could carry unknown diseases, or worse, hidden abilities. Daniel raised an eyebrow. She's a kid. That is irrelevant, the crystal alien replied. Many species develop dangerous abilities at young ages. A reptilian council member leaned forward. There is also the matter of probability. Doctors estimate the child may not survive long. Why would a human willingly accept such a burden? Daniel thought about that question. For a moment, he remembered Lyra's quiet voice. Before I die, can I have a father? He leaned forward slightly. Maybe because she asked. The council members looked at each other. One of them spoke again. You are new to the Galactic Alliance, Human Carter. Perhaps you do not understand how these decisions work. Then explain it, Daniel said calmly. The insect council member clicked its mandibles. The galaxy values stability, logic, careful planning, and compassion. Daniel asked. The chamber became silent. Finally, the station doctor spoke. There is another issue. The doctor said. Everyone turned toward him. The doctor tapped a screen, showing a medical chart. Her life expectancy is uncertain. It could be months, possibly less. The council members nodded as if that ended the discussion. Therefore, the insect council member said, we recommend the child remain under medical supervision until the end of her life. Daniel stared at the screen for a long moment. Months, maybe? Less. Then he looked back at the council. So the plan is simple, he said quietly. Leave her alone until she dies. That is not an accurate description, the crystal alien replied. It sounds accurate to me, Daniel said. The room grew tense. One council member studied the human carefully. You appear emotionally invested in this matter. Daniel shrugged slightly. Maybe. The reptilian member spoke again. You must understand something, human. Family bonds across species are rare in our galaxy. Adoption is usually limited to compatible biology and culture. Toniel leaned back in his chair. On Earth, we have a different idea. And what idea is that? The reptilian asked. Daniel's voice was calm. Family isn't about matching biology. The council members watched him carefully. It's about choosing someone. Daniel continued. Silence filled the chamber again. Finally, the insect council leader spoke. Even if your intentions are sincere, the risks remain unacceptable. Daniel slowly stood up. So that's it. Yes, the council leader replied. The request is denied. Daniel looked around the room at all the powerful alien leaders. Then he asked one final question. What if I take full responsibility? The council members hesitated. The director frowned. Human Carter, you do not understand what you are offering. Sure I do, Daniel replied. He reached into his jacket and pulled out a small digital tablet. If the galaxy won't take the risk, he placed the tablet on the table. Then I will. The room went completely silent, because every council member understood what that meant. The human was not backing down, and for the first time, the possibility of the adoption was becoming real. The council chamber was silent. Every alien official stared at the human standing at the center of the room. Daniel Carter remained calm, his hands resting on the table where he had placed the digital adoption form. For several seconds, no one spoke. Finally, the reptilian council member leaned forward. "You cannot be serious, human Carter." Samuel met his gaze. "I am." The reptilian's tail moved slowly behind his chair, a sign of deep concern in his species. "You are offering to take full legal responsibility for a child whose species is unknown, whose biology is unstable, who may not live very long." Daniel nodded once. "I heard the medical report." Another council member spoke, her voice sharp. "You would sacrifice your reputation in the Galactic Alliance for this." Daniel shrugged slightly. "Seems like a small price." The chamber filled with quiet whispers again. Some council members spoke to each other in low voices, clearly frustrated to them. The human's decision made no logical sense. Finally, the council leader raised a clawed hand for silence. "Human Carter," the leader said slowly, "do you fully understand the consequences of this action?" "I think so. If the child becomes dangerous, you will be held responsible." Daniel nodded. "If she spreads disease, you will be responsible." "Understood. If her condition requires expensive treatment, the Galactic Alliance will not pay." Daniel gave a small smile. "That's fine." The council members exchanged uneasy looks. The insect-like leader studied him carefully. "Why?" The leader finally asked. Daniel raised an eyebrow. "Why? What? Why are you doing this?" For the first time since entering the chamber. Daniel paused. He thought about the quiet corner of the adoption hall, about the silver girl sitting alone, about the simple wish she had whispered, "Before I die, can I have a father?" Daniel looked back at the council. Because someone should. The answer was so simple that it confused many of the alien officials. Then the reptilian member shook his head. "Humans are truly strange." Daniel chuckled softly. "Yeah, we hear that a lot." The council leader slowly leaned back in their chair. "If we approve this request, the adoption will be recorded across the entire alliance. Your species will be connected to the outcome." Daniel crossed his arms. "Humans can live with that." Another council member activated a small screen before a final decision is made. The child must be asked if she accepts the adoption. The director nodded. "That is standard procedure." Daniel agreed immediately. "That sounds fair." A few minutes later, Lyra was gently escorted into the council chamber by caretaker Solon. The girl looked nervous as she stepped inside the large room. So many powerful alien leaders were watching her that she felt very small. But then she noticed someone standing near the center of the chamber. The human Daniel gave her a small, reassuring smile. Lyra slowly walked toward him. Solon placed a gentle hand on her shoulder. "Do not be afraid." The caretaker whispered. The council leader spoke next. "Child, we have been discussing your future." Lyra lowered her head slightly. "Yes, sir." The leader continued. "This human has requested permission to adopt you." Lyra blinked in surprise. Her eyes slowly turned toward Daniel. "You did?" Daniel nodded. "Yeah." The girl looked confused. "But why?" Daniel crouched down so he could speak at her level again. "Because you said you wanted a father." For a moment, Lyra said nothing. Her blue eyes slowly filled with tears. The council leader interrupted. "You must understand something, child. Your health condition is serious. Your life may be short." Lyra nodded quietly. "I know, Olive. You accept this adoption. You will leave this station with the human. He will become your legal guardian." The girl looked back at Daniel. He waited patiently. No pressure. No expectations, just quiet understanding. Finally, Lyra asked a very small question. "If I say yes, will you really stay with me?" Daniel's answer came immediately. Of course. Her voice trembled slightly. Even if I'm sick? Yeah. Even if I'm different? Daniel smiled gently. Kid, humans are different from everyone. For a moment, the room felt completely still. Then Lyra slowly stepped forward. Her small hand carefully grabbed Daniel's sleeve, and in a very soft voice, she said the word she had wanted to say for so long. Father. Several council members looked stunned. Caretaker Solon quietly wiped moisture from her eyes. The council leader cleared their throat. The child has accepted the adoption. A digital screen appeared above the central table, displaying the official agreement. Human. Daniel Carter, the leader, announced, if you sign this document, the adoption becomes permanent. Daniel picked up the tablet. He looked at Lyra one more time. She was staring up at him with a mixture of hope and disbelief. For the first time since arriving at the adoption center, she was not sitting alone. Daniel pressed his finger against the screen. The signature appeared instantly. The adoption was complete. Across the council chamber, many aliens stared in disbelief. A human had just adopted the most unwanted child in the entire station, and none of them could understand why. But for Lyra, none of that mattered anymore, because she was holding on to Daniel's hand tightly, and for the first time in her life, she was no longer alone. The adoption news spread across the station faster than anyone expected. Within hours, nearly every officer, doctor, and visitor in the Galactic Adoption Center had heard the same strange story. A human had adopted the Silver Girl. Some aliens called the decision foolish. Others called it reckless. A few simply shook their heads and said the same thing again and again. Humans are strange. But inside one quiet medical room, none of those voices mattered. Lyra sat on the edge of a small bed while several medical scanners slowly moved around her. Soft blue lights passed across her silver skin as the machines collected data. Daniel stood nearby, watching carefully. Dr. Vesh, the station's lead medical scientist, studied the readings on a floating screen. This will only take a moment, the doctor said. We must perform a final examination before you leave the station. Daniel nodded. Problem. He glanced toward Lyra. She looked nervous, her small hands gripping the edge of the bed again. Daniel walked closer. Hey, he said gently. She looked up. Are they going to find something bad? She asked quietly. Daniel leaned against the wall beside her. Doctors always find something, he said with a small smile. That's kind of their job. Lyra gave a weak little laugh, but the truth was, Daniel was also curious. The council had said her biology was unusual, but they had not explained everything. Dr. Vesh suddenly leaned closer to the screen. That's interesting. Another scientist walked over. What did you find? The doctor zoomed in on the data. Look at these energy readings. The second scientist frowned. That can't be correct. Daniel raised an eyebrow. What's going on? The doctors exchanged uncertain looks. Human Carter, Dr. Vesh said slowly. Your adopted daughter's cells are producing an unusual form of biological energy. Daniel blinked. Is that bad? That depends, the doctor replied. He tapped the screen again, revealing another chart. We originally believed the energy was a sign of cellular instability. And now? Daniel asked. The doctor looked puzzled. Now it appears to be controlled. The room grew quiet. Lyra tilted her head. Am I in trouble? Daniel shook his head quickly. No, kid. The scientists continued studying the readings. This pattern is highly structured, the second scientist said, almost like a natural power source. Dr. Vesh nodded slowly. I have never seen anything like it. Daniel crossed his arms. So what does that mean? The doctor hesitated. Means the child may not be weak at all, Lyra. blinked. I'm not. The doctor looked directly at her. Your body is doing something very unusual. Daniel leaned forward. Usual. Dr. Vesh opened a historical database on the screen. Old records appeared. Some were extremely ancient, older than the Galactic Alliance itself. These records mention a species known only through fragments of history, the doctor explained. The screen displayed an old symbol beside a faded image of a silver-skinned figure. Daniel studied it carefully. That looks like her. Yes, the doctor said quietly. The room grew silent. According to ancient texts, the doctor continued, this species was believed to possess extraordinary biological energy. Some records even describe them as living power sources. Daniel raised both eyebrows. Wait, are you saying she's dangerous? The doctor shook his head quickly. No, not dangerous. Then what? Dr. Vesh looked back at the screen again. Valuable, the word hung in the air. Daniel immediately frowned. I don't like the sound of that. The second scientist spoke next. If these readings are correct, many governments across the galaxy would be very interested in studying her. Lyra looked confused. Studying me? Daniel stepped closer to her. That's not happening. Dr. Vesh raised his hands. We are only discussing scientific curiosity. Daniel's voice became firmer. She's not a lab experiment. The doctor nodded slowly. Of course. You are her legal guardian now. He paused for a moment before speaking again. But you should understand something important. Daniel waited. If the galaxy learns what she might be, some people will want access. Daniel looked down at Lyra. She was staring at the floor again. It's the same way she had in the adoption hall, like someone waiting to be rejected. Daniel gently placed a hand on her shoulder. Hey, he said softly. She looked up. Yeah. You're coming home with me. Lyra blinked. Home, Earth, Daniel said. Her eyes widened slightly. That's your planet. Yep. She hesitated. No. Do humans live in? Families there. Daniel laughed quietly. Yeah, lots of them. Lyra thought about that for a moment. Do you think they will like me? Daniel smiled warmly. Kid, humans like anyone who needs a family. For the first time since the medical scan started, Lyra's shoulders relaxed. But across the room, Dr. Vesh still stared at the ancient records on the screen. Because one sentence in the old texts worried him. It described the silver species. With a single phrase, children of living stars. And if that description was true, the small girl leaving the station with a human father might one day become something far greater than anyone expected. The transport ship from the Galactic Adoption Center moved quietly through the dark ocean of space. Inside the small passenger cabin, Lyra sat beside the wide viewing window. Her silver face reflected softly in the glass as she watched the distant stars pass by like tiny lights. She had never traveled like this before. For most of her life, the only place she knew was the quiet adoption station. Now, everything was changing. Across from her, Daniel Carter was adjusting something on a small tablet. He was reviewing travel documents and communication messages from the human embassy. After the adoption announcement, many officials had contacted him. Some were curious, some were confused, and a few were clearly worried. Daniel sighed and closed the tablet. Too many messages. He looked over at Lyra. She was still staring at the stars. Pretty amazing, huh? He said. Lyra nodded slowly. There are so many. Daniel walked over and sat beside her. Yeah, the galaxy's a big place. For a moment, they both watched the stars in silence. Then Lyra spoke quietly. Is Earth far away? Too far, Daniel replied. A few jumps through the warp gates and we'll be there. She tilted her head slightly. Will there be other humans? Daniel laughed softly. About 8 billion of them. Lyra's eyes widened. 8 billion? Give or take. She looked shocked. A lot of fathers. Daniel chuckled. Yeah, but only one of them is yours. Lyra smiled shyly at that. It was still a strange word to her. Father, she repeated it quietly in her mind, as if testing how it felt. For the first time in her life, the word belonged to someone real. Suddenly, the cabin door opened. A tall alien officer stepped inside. His uniform showed he was part of the station's security team escorting them to the nearest warp gate. Human. Carter, the officer said politely. We are approaching the first jump point. Daniel nodded. Thanks for the update. The officer glanced briefly at Lyra. For a moment, something like curiosity crossed his face. Is the child comfortable? He asked. Lyra looked down shyly. Daniel answered for her. She's doing fine. The officer nodded and left the room. After the door closed, Lyra looked back at the stars. Why do people keep looking at me like that? She asked. Daniel leaned back in his seat. Because they don't understand you yet. She thought about that. Is that bad? Daniel shook his head. Not really. Humans deal with that all the time. Lyra looked confused. You do? Yep, Daniel said. Whenever humans meet something new, we usually react in 2 ways. What ways? Some people get scared, he explained, and the others. Daniel smiled slightly. The others get curious. Lyra thought about that for a moment. Which one are you? Daniel shrugged. I guess I'm the curious type. She smiled again. Outside the window, the stars suddenly stretched into long lines of light. As the ship entered the warp gate, for a few seconds, the entire universe looked like flowing silver energy. Lyra stared in amazement. It's beautiful, she whispered. Daniel nodded. First warp jump is always the best. After a few moments, the stars returned to normal. But something strange happened inside the cabin. The lights flickered briefly. Daniel frowned. Lyra looked at her hands. Soft. Silver light was glowing faintly beneath her skin. Father. Daniel looked down. Yeah? My hands are glowing again. Daniel blinked. Glowing. She slowly lifted her hands. The faint silver light pulsed softly, like a quiet heartbeat. Daniel rubbed the back of his neck. Well, that's new. Lyra looked worried. Did I break something? Daniel laughed. No, kid. I'm pretty. Sure you didn't break the ship. Just then, the cabin door opened again, but this time 2 crew members rushed inside. One of them looked at the control screen on the wall. That's strange, the pilot said. What? The other asked. The ship's energy system just stabilized itself. Daniel raised an eyebrow. Is that unusual? The pilot nodded slowly. It fixed a fluctuation that normally requires manual control. He looked around the room. It's almost like something corrected the energy flow automatically. Lyra slowly lowered her glowing hands. The light faded again. Daniel noticed. He looked at her carefully. Then he remembered what the station doctor had said. Her body produces unknown energy. Daniel smiled slightly. Maybe the doctor was right. Maybe Lyra was more special than anyone realized. But at that moment, none of that mattered, because the small girl beside him was still staring out the window with wonder in her eyes, and quietly holding onto his sleeve. Across the galaxy, powerful civilizations were still debating whether adopting the Silver Child had been a mistake. But they did not understand something important yet. The girl they once ignored is already beginning to change things. Not with power, not with fear, but simply by being part of a human family. And the galaxy was about to learn just how powerful that could be. The galaxy finally understands. The blue planet slowly appeared in the viewing window of the transport. Ship, Lyra pressed her small hands against the glass as she stared at it in silence. So, that's Earth? She asked softly. Daniel stood beside her and smiled. Yep, home. The planet looked beautiful from space. Blue oceans covered most of its surface, with green land and soft white clouds slowly moving across the atmosphere. Lyra had never seen anything like it. It's alive, she whispered. Daniel nodded. That's one way to describe it. The ship began its slow descent toward the human spaceport. Other ships moved around them, traveling in and out of orbit. Lyra watched everything with wide eyes. So many ships, so many people. Daniel chuckled. Humans like to stay busy. A moment later, the ship landed smoothly at the New Horizons spaceport. One of Earth's main diplomatic arrival centers, the door of the ship opened with a quiet hiss. Warm air filled the cabin. Lyra stepped forward slowly. Her feet touched Earth for the first time. The ground felt different. Gravity felt slightly stronger than the station. She had lived on, but she did not feel afraid. Daniel stood beside her the entire time. Ready? He asked. She nodded. Together they walked down the ramp. A few human officials waited nearby. They had already heard about the unusual adoption. News traveled very quickly through human networks. One woman stepped forward and smiled warmly. Welcome back, Daniel. Thanks, Maria, he replied. Maria then looked down at the small silver girl beside him. And this must be Lyra. Lyra hid slightly behind Daniel's arm. Maria crouched down gently so she was closer to the girl's height. Hello there. Lyra peeked out carefully. Hello. Maria's smile grew wider. You're going to like Earth. Lyra looked around. Again, there were humans walking everywhere. Workers moving cargo, pilots talking. Families waiting for travelers. Some people noticed the silver-skinned girl, A. Few stared in surprise. But something else happened too. A small human boy walking with his mother pointed excitedly. Mom, look. Mother quickly turned when she saw Lyra. She seemed surprised for a second, but then she simply smiled and waved. Lyra slowly waved back. Daniel noticed and leaned down slightly. See? He said quietly. They're not scared. Lyra looked relieved. They're nice. Daniel laughed softly. Most humans are. They walked toward the exit of the spaceport, outside. The sky stretched wide above them. Bright sunlight warmed the ground. Lyra looked up in amazement. So much light. Daniel smiled. Wait until you see sunsets. She turned in a slow circle, trying to see everything at once. Trees moved gently in the wind. Birds flew across the sky. Cars moved along distant roads. For the first time in her life, Lyra felt something she had never truly felt before. Belonging, but far away from Earth, inside the Galactic Alliance Council chamber. Several alien leaders were watching a live transmission of the arrival. The insect-like council. Leaders studied the screen carefully. So the human actually brought her home. One member said, yes. Another replied, they truly intend to raise her. Another council member sighed. Humans continue to surprise us. On the screen, they watched as Lyra held Daniel's hand while walking across the spaceport entrance. The Reptilian Council member spoke quietly. I still do not understand their logic. The crystal-skinned alien responded. Perhaps logic is not the reason. The chamber grew silent again. Back on Earth. Daniel and Lyra reached a small transport vehicle waiting outside the spaceport. Daniel opened the door. This is it. He said, my home is about an hour from here. Lyra climbed into the seat. Carefully. Before closing the door, she looked up at him. Father. Yeah. She hesitated for a moment. Then she asked the question she had once believed would never be answered. Am I really your daughter now? Daniel smiled warmly. Of course you are. Lyra thought about that. Then she smiled back. A small, happy smile that no one had seen on her face before. Far across the galaxy, many alien species were still confused about the strange human decision. They had expected power. They had expected strategy. They had expected hidden plans. But instead, the human had done something much simpler. He had given a lonely child a family, and slowly, the galaxy was beginning to understand something important about humanity. Their greatest strength was not their technology, not their ships, not their weapons. It was something far more powerful. The simple human ability to care about someone, even when no one else would. And that small act of kindness was already changing the future of the stars.